And in light of the fact that our Wednesday nights next week began looking at eschatology again, I wanted to do an overview of some of the eschatological systems, some of the theological systems of end times beliefs, how different Christians interpret these things. And so I think it'd be important for us to do this. And just to kind of set the tone a little bit, just got this month's copy of Jan Markell's Understanding the Times. I don't know if any of you, well, I do know a few of you subscribe to this. Free publications, good information. She has some good guests from time to time. You know, our old friend Eric Barger used to co-host with her for his, I think his wife may have gotten sick. I think that's what happened. And he started just working out of his house. But anyway, this lead article here says the setup, 10 indicators that the hour is late. And so she begins to talk about things such as the world is looking for a leader, and right now it lacks a leader that could unite the world. The rise to prominence of a globalist outfit called the World Economic Forum, paving the way to a one-world government. Sounds scary kind of stuff, right? But our hope is in Christ, amen? But these things the Bible does speak to. The Bible prophesies a coming cashless society. I don't know if you know this, but right now the Biden administration is trying to push forward a digital currency right now. And any day that could go through and our dollars would basically be worth whatever they tell us they're worth going forward. That would mean our 401ks, everything. Wait, hang on. That would mean your 401ks. I said ours. I don't have one anymore. Your 401ks would be worth whatever the government decides that they're worth in that moment. And so that is something that is literally in the works right now. So many of these things are. The last 3 years, the frightened masses chose to trust in the government rather than try to fend for themselves. The article points to the fact that we all gave up our rights and our liberties for a COVID vaccine, right? We all stayed home, even after the evidence told us that staying home didn't really do anything. We still did so. Civil unrest, lawlessness, wars, rumors of wars, all of these different things. And there's a lot more. But again, I'm not here to frighten you tonight. I just want you to realize that this is a topic that is near and dear to all of us. Now, I know a lot of times as Christians, some of our churches, especially in the more Calvinistic, more Reformed churches, there's not a whole lot that is said about eschatology. In fact, very little is said about eschatology in many of those churches. But it is important. In fact, I want you to see a few things here tonight as we review for some of us, and then as we maybe learn some new things as well. I want us to look at what the word eschatology means, first of all. It comes from two words. And so we know that eschatos means last or last things, and then logos is the word, it would be the study of, and so it's the study of the last things, the study of the end times, and so it's an important thing. So that would be related to the second coming of Christ, the events before and after, and that would include the rapture, if you believe that. I hope you do. It's a biblical reality, but many Christians don't believe in the rapture. But that is what eschatology is. So again, it's the study of last things. Now, there are two big major areas of agreement for all Christians, and this is true Christians, not just people who, their parents were Christians, and so they go to church every Easter, maybe every Christmas too, but they have no relationship with Jesus. They've never repented of their sin. They're just kind of this cultural, Americanized Christian, right? Little c in that regard. But all true Christians, there are two main points of agreement. Now, the first one is this, that all three views we're going to look at tonight, the major views, amillennial, premillennial, postmillennial, those are the three big categories. Now, I know this may not sound like a whole lot of fun tonight, okay? But this is very, very important. We'll see why, again, here in just a few moments. But all of these areas believe that Jesus Christ is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and that's great because He is, amen? All of the, is that thunder? Oh, that was a child, okay. All right, you may want to check on them. That may have been a head in the wall, kind of. That was a big sound. Is that? We have a situation in the nursery. Yeah. Paul Arrington? No, kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, so he's the King of Kings, he's the Lord of Lords, and he rules or will rule over everything. And it'll be a glorious kingdom that he'll rule over at some point. And the point is another area of contention, when that happens. Secondly, all major branches of Christianity agree that Jesus Christ will one day return to this world, literally, physically, visibly, and gloriously, and he will do so to judge the world. He'll judge everything. And so we all agree on that. The differences come into play as to, and here's the major areas of disagreement, when, how, and where those things will happen, okay? So when, how, and where. For instance, when Jesus will reign, that's the timing of his reign. How Jesus will reign, okay? The nature, is it going to be literal or is it figurative? Some people think Jesus is reigning in a kingdom here on earth right now, and that's dangerous to believe in certain ways. We're going to talk about why over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And then where Jesus will reign, so the place of his reign. Is he going to reign literally from a throne in Jerusalem? Is he going to reign from heaven? Is his reign just symbolic? All of those things are important questions to answer. And we, again, Christians disagree on many of these things. But there is a way that is more right than the other ways. In fact, if I may take a verse out of context, there's a way that seems right unto a man. And then he becomes a premillennialist, and he's really right, okay? So that's horribly out of context. I was trying to make a good joke like Tyler earlier, but I just don't have it. Just crossing the road and cracks and, okay, I won't try to tell jokes anymore. So there are some variations in all of those areas, in all of those different beliefs. In fact, when we look at a-meal, pre-meal, and post-meal, we're going to define what we mean by that, first of all, because for some of us that may be new, but we're going to see that they share a lot in common, but there are some major areas where they differ, and it's important to understand the differences, especially because so many popular theologians and pastors and preachers have varying views, and it definitely, absolutely 100% taints and colors. Taints is more negative, but it also colors, which can be good, their view of all of the rest of their theology. Eschatology is not a separate thing that sits outside of all of the rest of theology. Eschatology rubs shoulders with soteriology. So the study of the last things, eschatology, rubs shoulders with salvation kind of Bible stuff. Who saves? How do you have to be saved? Are you saved different in the Old Testament than we are today? All of those things are important. And depending on someone's interpretive stance on eschatology, on the end times, it will also bleed into their soteriology. And so there are some major differences. It bleeds into other areas as well, especially their church doctrine, ecclesiology, what people believe about the church, because the church and Israel are either the same thing or they're not the same thing. And how you view that is a major item of theological importance. We believe that the church and Israel are distinct, and I think we can make a good case of that tonight if we have time to get there. I think we will. But it matters. If you think that the church has replaced Israel, then what that says is that you don't believe that Jesus will literally fulfill the promises that he made to Israel. You believe he will spiritually, fulfill them somehow, or figuratively, I should say. Jesus is everything he does is spiritual, right? But I mean figuratively. And so it's important for us to understand. So let's look at these three views. So when, how, and where are the questions we're going to look at for each of these. So I had a whole nother outline for tonight, and I just whittled it down. I'm just trying to give you these core things because, again, Sunday morning we're going to hit Daniel chapter 1. We're going to do the entire chapter, Lord willing. So we're going to hit the ground running. So this is, that's going to be a major undertaking. But I've been wrestling with it for months now, and we can do the entire chapter this Sunday. So it's going to be fun. And so, challenge accepted. Okay, we're going to do it. So let's talk about this first view, the amillennial view. Amillennial view. Chapter 1, yeah. Corey and Meredith got a little preview of 1 and 9, actually, the other night. And if it hadn't been for going back and forth to getting so many refills of our pizza, we may have gotten further, huh, Corey? That's right. But man, that was good. Mr. Gaddy's, sulfur, good stuff. Anyway, the amillennial view. So the amillennial position is the dominant view of the modern church today. It is also the view that's held by the Roman Catholic Church. It's been held since the time of Augustine, or Augustine, if you call him that, but Augustine. And so it dates to about, somewhere around the early 400s, because Augustine lived from 354 to like 430 A.D. And so that's the time period where this view began to develop. It's also the view of such reformers as John Calvin and Martin Luther. And that's the reason that so many Calvinists today, or those who call themselves Reformed Christians, which I believe that we are Reformed as well, but most of them don't believe that we are because of this reason. We're not amillennial here. Our official church doctrine is not amillennialism. And so they say, therefore, we're not Reformed. But I can show you that the non-Reformed eschatology that we hold to, premillennialism, is the oldest belief of the church. And we'll look at that here in just a few minutes. But Martin Luther, John Calvin, now popular amillennial teachers today, Voddie Baucham. I know a lot of y'all really like Voddie. He's done some great works. He's done really good stuff on speaking out against racism and the gender issues that are happening today. But his eschatology has been noticeably bleeding into other areas of his teaching. He is an amillennialist. He does not believe in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ. And that's what amillennial means. A from the Latin for no or nil, and then the millennial speaks to that 1,000-year reign of Jesus that Revelation chapter 20 speaks of. And so Voddie Baucham, R.C. Sproul, Owen, is it Strahan? Is that Strahan? Strahan, okay. Strahan? Strand? Oh, Strand. Yes, ma'am. Apparently we have a fan of Mr. Strand. But Owen Strand, amillennial. Okay. Jeffrey Johnson, very popular, good author. He's even done some biblical counseling kind of work too. Amillennial. So again, it means no millennial. And now here's the rub. So they don't. What is it? Owen, yeah. Yeah, we have one of his books out in the lobby. It's excellent. He's done some great stuff. Godly young fellow. Godly, he's up and coming. He's one of the contenders to take over as the prominent Protestant after the passing of MacArthur. Well, I'm not going to speak to that. I want there to be a premillennialist that takes over. Someone like Nathan Busenitz or someone like that. But that's just me. Michael Vlack or someone. But again, so amillennial denotes the negation of the word, so no millennial. But that's not technically true because amillennials, like R.C. Sproul and these others, they do believe that the millennium kingdom is spiritual. So it's figurative. It's not that they don't think there's any reign of Christ, it's just spiritual. So it's kind of a misnomer, but again, they don't believe in a literal kingdom. So when will Jesus reign? For amillennialists, they believe that Christ's kingdom transpires in the present age, so between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ, that we're in the millennial kingdom right now. We're in the millennial kingdom right now. Therefore, it's not a literal period of 1,000 years, but the use of, in Revelation 20, the use of the 1,000 years 6 times, no doubt. I know I'm tainting my view here, but I'm trying not to. I'm trying to be objective. But the 6 uses of the 1,000 years, they say that's just figurative language. That it doesn't mean literal because it's speaking of a time, according to them, between the first coming and the second coming of Christ. It's just symbolic of a long period of time. And so they teach that the binding of Satan occurred at the first coming of Christ as a result of Christ's death and resurrection. Now, that's what amillennialists teach. Now again, there's variations in these things, but let me just ask you to make one simple observation. Is Satan bound right now? No. No. If he is, he's got like a key to the cage, maybe. I don't know. And there's something. He's still doing a whole lot of damage here. But now, how and where will Jesus reign? According to amillennialists. How and where they believe. Okay, so amillennialists deny that the reign of Jesus is literal physical kingdom on earth. For them, they believe that the reign of Christ is a present spiritual kingdom. So again, right now, for an amillennialist, Jesus is reigning spiritually as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now, in a sense, that's right. He is reigning. But there's also the observation that we have to make from passages like we see in 2 Corinthians, where it says that Satan is the what? The god of this world. He's in charge, so to speak, here. God's still on his throne. Jesus still reigns, but he allows Satan to be the god of this world right now, which means Jesus isn't exercising all of his rule, all of his reign right now in this present time. He's waiting. And so you start reading Revelation with this amillennial view, or even the postmillennial view, which we're going to get to. They've actually started kind of bleeding together. It's kind of hard to define who's what anymore in those two camps. But they're starting to redefine even what the scroll is in Revelation chapter 6, that seven-seal scroll that Jesus unfolds, unrolls, excuse me. So anyway, we'll talk more about that a little bit later here. So again, they think it's a spiritual kingdom. Christ reigns over the church in the hearts of believers and or in heaven over the souls of the redeemed. Now, again, there's a sense that this is a reality, but it's not ultimate reality. It's not ultimate reality because, again, Satan is the god of this world right now. He is still free and roaming. So millennialists believe that Christ will return someday to judge all people and bring in the eternal state. Again, all Christians believe that, at least they should. They deny, though, millennialists deny a literal 7-year period of tribulation before the second coming of Christ. They also deny the literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus. So here's a chronology. Look at this chronology on the screen. Let me see if that's big enough you can read that? All right. So, and this may be in your notes too. I can't remember what all got put in there, but so there's this development of God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom during this present age. And so you hear a lot of kingdom talk from amillennialists. So you see this from postmillennialists too. We're building the kingdom. There's a whole lot of that. And we have to be very careful as Christians how we define what the kingdom is now. How we talk about God's kingdom here on earth and building this kingdom. There's a reason Jesus taught his disciples to pray what should be called the disciples' prayer. The Lord's Prayer is in John 17. Just look that one up later. But what's commonly called the Lord's Prayer, right? The Our Father prayer. Jesus taught them to pray, thy kingdom what? Come on earth as it is in heaven. So if we're praying for it to come, then the obvious thing is that it's what? It's not here yet. And so we have to be very careful when we talk about the kingdom. Again, we'll come back to that as we get to the end of this tonight, Lord willing. I just saw what time it was. So this development of both good and bad kingdoms. The second coming of Christ, then the general resurrection of all people. There's a general judgment of all people, and then eternity starts. And there's a timeline. Go back to that timeline. Sorry. I don't know if you can read that. Did those print in your notes as well? No? Okay, so this timeline, I can put these on the website if that'll help. This gives you an overview of the typical amillennial viewpoint of the end times. Now again, this is just the typical. This doesn't make them heretics or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But there are some holes here we'll see shortly. And there are variations within all of these camps, obviously. You have fanatics in all of these areas. Even in pre-mill, there are some fanatics. All right, so that's the basic timeline. Now, the premillennial view, sandwiched it here in the middle of the two. And again, we'll see why here in a little bit. But premillennialism, was the view of the early church. It wasn't always called premillennialism, though, and that's the rub. That term comes a little bit later. It used to be known as, anybody know? Chiliasm, or Chiliasm is how it looks, but it's Chiliasm. Okay, and so that was the teaching of the premillennial view. It is the oldest view of Christendom. It's the original view of Christendom. It's the view of the early church leaders like Papias, Tertullian, Clement of Rome, Barnabas, Ignatius, Polycarp, and even Justin the Martyr. All of these early church leaders, beginning with the disciples of John, like Papias and Polycarp, beginning with them, they all taught Chiliasm, the Chiliast view, the premillennial view. Chilias is Latin for 1,000. That's all that is. So speaks about the millennial reign, the 1,000-year reign. So now the problem was that after the 3rd century, amillennialism began to replace the prevailing view, and so that's when you had Augustine. The Catholic Church, the early roots of Catholicism were starting to take root, and they were blending in some of the Roman paganist kind of views. They kind of merged a lot of the different worships together, the false gods, with Christianity. It became the state religion a couple hundred years later. And so that was kind of all bled together. But it maintained the most popular view. And even the early reformers, again, many of them stayed with that amillennial view that the Catholic Church had. And so just by way of, to make a point here, when people accuse us, in fact, I've had someone here, not here, but someone came to our service one day and said, you're not really Reformed because you're not amillennial. And I said, no, you're not really Reformed because you didn't keep reforming away from Catholicism. And see, that's the truth. That amillennialism is still the Catholic eschatology. It still allows the church to be in power on the earth. But Jesus is the one with the power. Amen? The Holy Spirit through us is powerful, yes. But it's not about us ruling and reigning here, which is what the popes always wanted to do. And so we have even Protestants who are still holding on to that eschatology. Yes, sir?
So what does the Catholic Church want to do? Make the world Catholic.
Yeah, that's right.
It makes sense. That's their view. We gotta make the world Catholic with Jesus.
That's right. And that blends in with the post-mill view as well, which we'll get to. So that's a good observation. So premillennialism did start making a comeback, in the mid-19th century. And that's where you had, what's his name? John Darby. And that's where most people say the birth of premillennialism was with John Darby. It was never heard of before then. But it was called Chiliasm, or the Chiliastic view. It's still the premillennial view. And again, Papias, Polycarp, all the way from the Apostle John downward, those first leaders in the church after the apostles taught premillennialism. And so today, modern premillennialists, Charles Ryrie, this is actually my Ryrie study Bible that was given to me in 1988. All right, so the first study Bible I ever had came from a premillennialist. It's been recovered already, but anyway, you have Dwight Pentecost, John Walvoord, who I highly recommend reading his works. John Walvoord, W-A-L-V-O-O-R-D. He was a thinker, intellect, but he could speak in a very down-to-earth way. I like that because that's what I need. James Montgomery Boyce, of course, John MacArthur, Charles Swindoll, Michael Vlach, V-L-L-A-C-H, Dr. Ron Rhodes. He's a good writer, too. He's written a lot of books, Dr. Ron Rhodes. He has one called The Basics of Bible Prophecy. If you're interested, it's a great introduction to Bible prophecy. And a lot of these books are all on, if you have Logos or, what's the Amazon thing? Kindle? You can get them on Kindle, too. And Audible? Okay, Audible, thank you. Dr. Mark Hitchcock, highly recommend. Highly recommend. He's got several. One of them is like 101 Things About the End Times or something along that lines. But very, very good. Dr. Robert Leitner, I've really come to love his works and writings. Dr. Leitner's work is what really moved me over into the unlimited atonement camp. Good theologian. Dr. Richard Mayhew, outstanding, brilliant man, teacher at Master's College. So these are, and there's a whole lot more too. But there are a lot of guys who are still premillennial today, even though amillennialism is the most popular, but postmillennialism is the fastest growing eschatology today. Now, when will Jesus reign according to premillennialism? That's hard to say. Premillennialism teaches that the second coming of Jesus Christ will occur before, that's pre, right? Like if you're pre-diabetic, that means you're about to be diabetic, right? So before the millennial kingdom. That Christ returned to earth at the end of a literal 7 years of judgment, the 7 years of tribulation, that inaugurates then the millennial kingdom. So there's 7 years of tribulation, Christ returns, literal 1,000-year reign on the throne of David, his ancestor, right, on his human side, and then eternity starts. So how and where will Jesus reign? We hold, this is the view I believe, we hold that the millennial kingdom is a literal, physical, earthly kingdom of, guess how many years? 1,000 years. Just like it says in Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 6, it says it 6 times. 1,000 years long. Christ will rule and reign on the earth from the throne in Jerusalem. Now, according to this view, and in fact, in 3 weeks, we're going to look at the millennial kingdom. That would be the whole topic. I'm just kind of giving you an overview tonight of these different camps, but we're going to look at the rapture of the church. Is that a real thing or not? It is. I'm going to show you why. Again, that's next week. Kids are learning it too. And then the tribulation we'll look at. We'll look at the millennial kingdom and then eternity. So we'll look at all, that's the 4 major things that are coming the next 4 weeks. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. Very fun. So again, according to the pre-mill view, the kingdom will not be established by the conversion of souls over an extended period of time like the other systems. That's just one of the big differences. But the kingdom will be established by the glorious coming of Christ from heaven to earth. His feet will literally touch down. He'll split the mount in two. A river will flow a new direction. And there's all sorts of very specific prophecies that will be fulfilled at the second coming of Christ. And so that is coming. Excuse me. And so Satan will be bound then for 1,000 years during the duration of Christ's reign. That's Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3. The curse of the fall will be reversed. The Jewish people will be restored to their ancient land. They have never been in their full due land. The land promise that was given to Abraham, Israel's never owned all of it in modern times. They don't own, I forgot the percentage. It's a very small piece of property that they're inhabiting right now. Go down into Egypt, over into Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq. I mean, you start taking in all this massive area. That is all Israel's land. And they've never occupied that land that God's promised them. And so that has to literally be fulfilled. And it will in the millennial kingdom. When Jesus reigns literally for 1,000 years, there will be peace. There's a whole lot that the Bible says about that time. Psalm chapter 2 speaks about the millennial reign. And in 3 weeks, we'll go through a whole bunch of verses in the Old Testament that prophesy about this time period that Revelation 20 summarizes for us. And so we'll look at that. So Satan will be bound for 1,000 years. All of those things will happen that we said, the fall, the Jewish people restored. They get all of their land that was promised to them. And then there will be peace and righteousness and joy during that time period. Now, look at the chronology. Look at the chronology. This is a little bit more here. There's an increase of apostasy as this age draws to a close. Now, I just read you a sampling of some of the major headlines. But you look at what's happening in the world. Being heterosexual is out. Being a male or a female is out. We're pan-gender, transgender, and whatever the other buzzwords are today. Anything but the norm is happening. The world is different, folks. The world is not. Right.
But not to demonize them either. We can't like say, oh, yeah, that's fine, but not to demonize them either because everything, all sin is the same.
All sin is the same in the fact that it will separate us from God, but all sin is not equal in its consequence. It's not all equal in its consequence, and that's a... Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Sure. Sure, that'd be great. I'd like to see that. That'd be good. Thank you. But the point is that sin increases. The world's not getting better for Jesus to come back. And the other eschatological camps think that the world will get better before Jesus comes back. And folks, that's dangerous. That's dangerous. Remind me to say why it's dangerous. Somebody remind me why it's dangerous before we get through, okay? Yes, sir. Yeah, The internet, we have the internet now. That's proof that the heart of man is wicked beyond all things, and who can understand it? I completely disagree with their take on that. Yeah,
I'm sure the devil has
yeah.
all total control of all that. Like that was his idea that he put me in the kingdom and stuff like that.
It's not good. It's not good. It's useful. It's a useful tool, but
Yeah, I mean, we all use it, but
right. All right, let's move on. You're right. Let's move on. So, increase in apostasy. So the world's getting worse, and that's what we see. If we're honest, the world's getting worse. No, stay on that slide. I didn't make it through all those. The rapture of the church. Now, premillennialists, which we are, differ on where they think the rapture occurs, and that's okay. Some of us will be right, some of us will be wrong. That's okay. Once we're raptured, we're not going to care anyway. All right. And so I just pray, Maranatha, come quickly, Lord. I'm ready for the Lord to come back, and I pray you are too. Pray you are too. But the rapture is going to happen before the millennial kingdom. It will definitely happen before that. And if we're honest, it has to happen, which we'll see next week, before the tribulation, because we've not been appointed to wrath. And all of the tribulation is the wrath of God, not just the last 3.5 years, as a mid-tribber will say. And again, I know I'm using terms here. I'm sorry. It's just I'm trying to summarize some things. But so you have, after the rapture, you have the 7-year tribulation. You have the campaign of Armageddon. Second coming of Christ, campaign of Armageddon, where he smites all of his enemies. It's my favorite Old Testament, my favorite King James word. The Lord smiteth. It's a good word. So then Armageddon, right there, the millennial reign of Christ. That's that millennial kingdom, that 1,000-year reign. The great white throne judgment, not to be confused with the judgment of the sheep and the goats that happens before that. The creation of a new heaven, a new earth, and then eternity. That's the pre-mill timeline now. You can kind of get a look at, maybe, the timeline. There it goes. Thank you. So this just gives you an overview. The present age that we're in. It's lasted roughly 2,000 years since Christ. Again, roughly, because I can't do math today. Just ask Corey. I was struggling the other night trying to do math. The tribulation, that's 7 years. That's one more than 6. All right, 7. Okay, that was bad. Then the 1,000-year reign of Christ comes after that, and then eternity. Again, this is broad, but this is the typical premillennial view. This is the official view of our church. Now let's look at the postmillennial view. This is the one that's growing today. So postmillennialism is the young gun, all right, the young child on the scene. It did not come early, it came late, but it's gaining in popularity. It was the major millennial view of the 18th and 19th centuries. And so people were, as the world was getting better, they thought, technology was increasing. Okay, you had the development of things like the steam engine and telegraphs and communication. Ships were going across the oceans faster than ever. All of this stuff was happening, and so people thought, "Hey, look, the world's getting better. Jesus is coming back." So, because the world's getting better, and so this was that view. But something happened called World War I, and then right after it was this other thing. You remember what it was called? World War II. And then all of a sudden they went, maybe there's a hole in our theological ship. Maybe, just maybe, we're wrong and we read this incorrectly. And so there was no longer a big growth of postmillennial thought because they realized that the world was not getting better. However, because of things like the internet and the advances that we're making in medicine. Now, we're going to speak to those things when we study Daniel, because in the later part of Daniel, we're going to look at how it talks about how knowledge will increase exponentially. We're going to see that God's already dealt with those things. I just don't believe that amills and postmills interpret those things correctly. And we'll see more into this as we get into Daniel. But I lost my train of thought. Where was I? In Daniel. We'll look at that. Let me just get back to this. So all these advances have been coming again. That was the point. And so there's a resurgence in postmillennialism. People have a renewed hope that we're getting better. And it's not just some of the church people. If you look across the board, look at what our government's doing, look at what world governments are doing, look at what TV personalities are doing, look at what the media is doing. They're pushing out people who are narrow-minded, and they're pushing openness and open-mindedness and unity. Don't think about, what makes you different from those people. Think about what unites you with those people. And so all of the things that would separate us from one another are being called the no-no things to believe in and to hold on to, right? No, and you're getting canceled for being narrow-minded and bigoted. And we're told to love everybody and accept everybody.
You're looking for the word is inclusivity.
Inclusivity, thank you. That's it. Inclusivity. And so we're told that we can no longer be a private club of whosoever should believeth in me should not perish but have everlasting life. We can't say that. That's unloving now. And that's getting more and more true. People are becoming rabid against Christians who dare to proclaim there's only one way. Christians are being arrested every day in different places around the world. And we're fools if we don't think that can't possibly happen here should the Lord tarry. Amen? It can just as well happen here. America has no special blessing from God. America is not Israel. He doesn't owe us anything. In fact, I think, and it's just me now, I think that we're under the judgment of God. I think we're a Romans 1 culture, and that we're already experiencing the removal of God's hand from this country. Just look at what we're calling right now. Look at what we call truth. Look at what we call moral and good. We're calling evil good and good evil. We're under the judgment of God already. And so our job, I know I'm chasing a rabbit here, but can't help it, but our job doesn't change. Our job is that much more important today, is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's all that's going to help people, is the gospel. We have to tell about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Politics won't save them. Education system won't save them. Winning the lottery won't save them. It's Jesus that saves. It's Jesus only. But back to post-mill view. Modern Reconstructionist, here's a big word for you, theonomist. This is a growing little subset. And adherents to dominion theology, all these are post-millennial Christians or post-millennialists. Some of them are Christians. But this is that group. So Reconstructionist, theonomist, and adherents of dominion theology. When I say dominion theology, think about the New Apostolic Reformation. Think about Bethel School of Supernatural Signs and Wonders. Think about IHOP, not the pancake place, but the so-called church up in Kansas City, Mike Bickle. These are dominion theology people, and just the name tells you what they believe. They believe that we have to take over the world. And they have what's called a 7-mountain mandate. They have to take over the 7 spheres of influence: the economy, entertainment, political system, the church, the environment, and a couple others I forgot. But what is it? Education, and what's the other? I can't remember. It's ludicrous, but I don't put any stock in it. But that's what they believe. And you have people like Bill Johnson, again Mike Bickle, Cindy Jacobs out of Dallas. And there's just a plethora of them. There's local churches in our area that teach this dominion theology stuff. One's just over here at MLK. There's another one over this way, down towards Vider. I mean, they're all over the place. They're all over the place. This is a huge growing thing. And again, it comes from your ultra-reformed Calvinist camp, and on the far extreme, your hyper-charismatic camps. But they're uniting in their end-time belief that the church must take over the world so that Jesus can come back. Now, when will Jesus reign according to them? They believe he returns after, again, post, like your post-Toasties cereal. Do they still make those? I don't know if they even make those anymore. I'm dating myself here, but anyway, he'll come after the millennium kingdom. So consequently, then, they say that the millennium is the entire period of time, again, between the first and second comings of Christ, just like all millennialists teach, all right? And so they say that Christ is going to return then once this world's gotten better. So how and where? So for them, it's spiritual and political. Again, just to summarize, they think that the millennial kingdom is not literal, it's spiritual, that there's this golden age that's going to be ushered in. Now, let me tell you the problem with these views. Let me just summarize a couple things real quick, because we're getting short on time here. But postmillennialism, this view of this golden age of goodness that's coming, This plays right into the hands of the Antichrist system, a one-world government, a one-world religion, all of those things. It plays right into the hand of the New Age movement. It plays right into the hand of the Wiccan spiritualists now, the nature people. It plays, that's the environmental hippie people, right? It plays right into the hand of all of those different groups. They're all uniting around that common thing, that this is the golden age. The dawn of Aquarius and utopianism. That's right, thank you. All of those things. And you have all these different groups, political, religious, and otherwise, that are uniting in that world, in that realm, with those ideologies. Folks, that's dangerous for a church to hold on to, because that's setting the stage for the Antichrist and Satan. That's what it's doing. And the false prophet. That's the unholy trinity, right? The unholy trinity. Not talking about the matrix. So, how and where, that's it. So that's what they say. Now, the best known advocate for this view in recent years was Loraine Boettner. Loraine Boettner, post-mill theologian, he was outstanding in some other areas, but his eschatology was horrible, and it did bleed into some of his salvation theologies as well. Now, I have a real long quote here, but for time's sake, I'm going to skip it. But would anybody be interested in hearing it? I can put it. You want to hear it now? You want me to go ahead? Okay, I'll go ahead now. So he says that postmillennialism, and I'm just gonna call it post now, okay, just to save a little time, and I'm getting dry mouth. Post-mill is that view of the last things which hold that the kingdom of God is now being extended in the world through the preaching of the gospel and the saving work of the Holy Spirit in the hearts of individuals, that the world eventually is to be Christianized, and that the return of Christ is to occur at the close of a long period of righteousness and peace, commonly called the millennium. Now, is there some truth to that? Yeah. The world, as we share the gospel, we are Christianizing people. Not the world, but people. But the world's not getting better. The world's not getting better. And we're not doing it in order for Christ to come back. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. Those people, and this is not the intent for all of them. I know that's not the case. But again, they're playing into the whole Antichrist system. They are setting the stage to look for pseudo-Jesus, false Jesus. And what is Antichrist? It doesn't just mean against Christ. It means instead of Christ, in place of Christ. So that's who they're looking for here, ultimately. Now again, I don't think that's their intent, but that's where this theology leads. That's where it goes. So he goes on to say, this is Loraine Boettner. He says, it should be added that on the post-mill principles, the second coming of Christ will be followed immediately by the general resurrection, the general judgment, and the introduction of heaven and hell in their fullness at that time. The millennium to which the post-mill looks forward to is thus a golden age of spiritual prosperity during this present dispensation that is the church age. Now let me say one more thing here, because he said this. I am, and our church's stance is that we are pre-mill dispensational in our end times beliefs. Okay? The hermeneutic that we use is a literal hermeneutic. Literal, contextual, okay? Grammatical hermeneutic. We think that poetry is poetry. We think that prophecy. We think that an adjective is an adjective. And lolly, 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 get your adverb here. Anybody remember what that is? Okay, good. But we try to interpret things as literally as possible. We try to use the same hermeneutic for Genesis, for Psalms, and for Revelation, and for the Gospels, and for the writings of Paul. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all the same kind of writings, but we recognize apocalyptic writing. We're going to study Daniel this Sunday. It's a different kind of writing than is the Gospel of John or the Gospel of Mark. And we make those distinguishing observations. And so when we look at something like this and say that there's a golden age of spiritual prosperity during this present dispensation, they're using our word, dispensation. They all used to use it. It's even in the Westminster Confession. Covenantal versus dispensational, but they're misusing this golden era ideal. Anyway, I'm getting tongue twisted here, but let me move on. I chased a rabbit. I did. I want to just summarize. He says, the world at large will enjoy a state of righteousness which up to now has been seen only in relatively small and isolated groups. For example, some family circles, some local church groups, and kindred organizations. This does not mean that there will be a time on earth when every person will be a Christian or that all sin will be abolished, but it does mean that evil in all its many forms eventually will be reduced to negligible proportions, that Christian principles will be the rule, not the exception, and that Christ will return to a truly Christianized world. Folks, that's atrocious theology. I don't want that. You don't either. They don't really want that either.
We can't do that.
We can't do that. That's the failure of humanity. We've tried over and over again, but we cannot do that apart from the return of Christ. He has to come back before these things happen. But notice what he says. And this is, again, he was one of the most prolific and most elevated post-mill teachers. He just died in 1990, I think. So it hadn't been that long ago. But he said, not that every person will be a Christian or that all sin will be abolished. Then how in the world is that a golden era of righteousness that he just said before? It's not. It doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. So, again, this post-mill view has been held by a number, and it's still held today. John Owen, I love John Owen's Puritan writings, but he was a post-mill. You have to be careful reading some of the Puritans for that reason. Jonathan Edwards, more post-mill than amill. He wasn't really categorized, but I think he would be more post-mill. Charles Hodge had some great dogmatic books and theology books, but post-mill. Greg Bonson, he's a big popular one right now. The Rushdoony guy, John Rushdoony, very popular right now. Gary North, very dangerous right now. He's one of the Reconstructionist guys, if I remember right. And then Kenneth Gentry. Kenneth Gentry is very conservative. He's good. He's spoken at a lot of conferences and all that I've been to and know some folks, respectable men who have spoken out with him. But he is a post-mill. And then probably the ones that you know more of would be like James White and Doug Wilson. So you have these conservative, like homeschool family groups where, and like us, we want our children to worship with us. Like on Sunday mornings, we have all the family together. We don't separate every single time we get to church. Doug Wilson was a big proponent of that, but he's a Reconstructionist and post-millennial. They think they're making the world better. There's some danger in there. And James White is now post-mill. What's the guy's name you just said a while ago? Jeff Durbin has brought him over to the post-mill side. He was amill, but again, he didn't make a big leap. He just took a little step because they're so close together now. They're so close together. So here's the eschatology real quick in a chronology. Everything's going to get better and better and better. There's a golden age. Call it the dawn of Aquarius because that's what Oprah Winfrey calls it, okay? That's the same thing that they're painting. It's the same picture they're painting. Oprah Winfrey and Eckhart Tolle, her spiritual advisor, and what's that lady's name? Can't remember. There's some other New Age lady that she promotes all the time. But so then the coming of Christ, then the general resurrection of everybody, a general judgment of all people, and then eternity. Here's the chart. So it's kind of bland. Satan's bound when Jesus came already, so now we're in the golden age. This millennium has lasted about 2,000 years so far, and one day Christ will come back, and then there'll be the eternal state. This is dangerous. Again, this is setting the stage for the Antichrist. I'm not calling post-mills of the Antichrist system. I'm not saying that, but whether they know it or not, this is painting that picture. Now, look at this next chart. Summary. Can you see that? It's kind of hard to see. But this just sets it all out. And I'll try to put these slides. Somebody remind me. I'll put these slides up on the website or the social media. But you've got amill, pre-mill, post-mill. When will Christ reign for amill? Between the first and second coming. For post-mill at the bottom, between the first and second coming. Basically, all Christianity believes that Christ is reigning right now, spiritually and figuratively, except for premillennialists, which is what our church stance is. Christ does rule in a sense, but Satan is the god of this world for this time, according to the Bible. Jesus himself said so. We think Jesus is going to come back and establish his rule. And when he opens the seven-sealed scroll, that very first seal, when he breaks it, he's opening he's letting Satan know that the world, all creation belongs to him. That's like the title deed of creation that he's opening. And he's going to begin to expand it. And everything that's written in it's going to begin to happen at his command as he breaks seal after seal. So, how and when and where for amill? Christ rules spiritual kingdom. Post-mill, same kind of thing. He's ruling spiritually now in all of us. And again, in a sense, both those are true. He does rule his church, but they go too far, which is why I believe premill is the right thing. The reign of Christ happens after the second coming. He'll literally reign, just like the Old Testament prophesied, and then Christ will rule perpetually, literally for 1,000 years, and then he'll rule perpetually, just eternally after that. But that's just a quick summary. Now, there's so much else to say here, but we're out of time. Any questions about this? Very quickly.